The moment you die, your VA check dies with you. Not next month. Not after a grace period. Instantly. And if you haven't done one specific thing before that day comes, your spouse, the person who stood next to you through every appointment, every bad night, every fight with the VA over your rating, could be left with nothing but a folded flag and a stack of bills. Stay with me for the next few minutes because what I'm about to show you is the difference between your spouse being taken care of for the rest of her life or being forced to sell the house within a year. This is not a scare tactic. This is math, and it's happening to veteran families every single week because nobody sat them down and explained it clearly. So let's fix that right now. Here's something almost nobody tells veterans when they're going through the disability claims process, when they're fighting for a higher rating, when they're finally getting that compensation they earned. Your VA disability compensation is built around one person, you. It is not a joint benefit. It is not something that automatically rolls over to your spouse when you pass away. The day you die, that monthly deposit stops, no matter how long you served, no matter how high your rating was, no matter how much you were relying on that income to keep your household running. If you were rated 100% and receiving several $1,000s a month, and that income disappears the same week your spouse is planning your funeral, you can imagine how fast the financial floor can drop out from under her. This is one of the most common and most devastating surprises military families run into, and it is almost entirely preventable if you understand what's available and you act while you still can. Let's talk about why this catches so many families off guard. Most veterans spend years, sometimes decades, focused entirely on their own claim. They're fighting to get service connection approved. They're appealing a low rating. They're gathering buddy statements and medical records and doing everything humanly possible to get the VA to acknowledge what their body and mind went through in service. That fight consumes so much energy that almost nobody stops to ask the next question: what happens to my spouse when I'm gone? It's not because veterans don't love their spouses or don't think about the future. It's because the system itself doesn't put that question in front of you. There's no pop-up, no required form, no counselor who sits you down at the VA office and says, "Before we finish this appointment, let's talk about your spouse's financial survival plan." You have to go looking for it yourself. And by the time most families realize this gap exists, it's often after the veteran has already passed, and by then, some of the best protections are no longer available. So let's get into what actually protects a surviving spouse, because there are real programs designed exactly for this situation, and understanding them now, while you're alive and able to make decisions, is the entire point of this video. The first thing to understand is Dependency and Indemnity Compensation, commonly known as DIC. This is a tax-free monthly benefit paid by the VA to eligible surviving spouses, and in some cases to surviving children or parents, when a veteran's death is connected to their military service, or when the veteran was rated permanently and totally disabled for a certain period of time before death. DIC is not automatic. Your spouse has to apply for it, and she has to prove eligibility, which usually means showing that your death was caused by, or related to, a service-connected condition, or that you met specific disability rating requirements for a set number of years before you passed. This is where so many families lose out on money they were entitled to, simply because nobody explained what evidence needs to be gathered, and by the time a grieving spouse starts trying to piece together medical records and service history on her own, months or years can go by. Benefits can be delayed, and in some cases, families give up entirely because the process feels impossible to navigate alone while also dealing with grief. Here's the part that should really grab your attention if you're a veteran with a high disability rating. If you have been rated totally disabled, that's the VA's 100% rating, for at least 10 years before your death, your spouse may qualify for DIC regardless of whether your death was directly caused by that condition. There are also pathways if you were rated totally disabled for at least 5 years from the date of your discharge, or for 1 year before your death if you were a former prisoner of war. These rules exist because Congress recognized that a veteran who lived with a total disability for years, whose body and health were fundamentally altered by that condition, put a strain on the household and on the marriage that deserves recognition, even if the official cause of death listed on the paperwork wasn't directly tied to the service-connected condition. This is a huge deal, and it is exactly the kind of detail that gets missed because veterans assume DIC only applies if they die from the condition itself. Now let's talk about something separate from DIC, which is the Survivor Benefit Plan, often called SBP. This one applies specifically to military retirees, not to disability compensation. If you retired from the military and you're receiving retired pay, that retired pay also stops the day you die, just like disability compensation does. SBP is essentially life insurance built into the military retirement system. It allows a retiree to elect, usually at the time of retirement, to have a portion of their retired pay withheld each month in exchange for guaranteeing that a percentage of that retired pay continues to their spouse after they pass away. This is a decision that gets made at retirement, and it can be one of the most consequential financial decisions of a military career, because if a retiree opts out of SBP to keep more money in their pocket during retirement and then passes away, the spouse loses that retired pay completely with no way to get it back. If you're still serving, or if you're approaching retirement and haven't finalized this decision, this is worth a serious conversation with your spouse and with a benefits counselor before you sign anything, because reversing an SBP decision later in life is difficult, sometimes impossible, and always more expensive than getting it right from the start. There's an important overlap here that trips a lot of families up, and it's worth explaining clearly. For years, there was something called the widow's tax, where a surviving spouse who was entitled to both SBP and DIC would have her SBP payments reduced dollar for dollar by the amount of DIC she received. In other words, families were paying premiums for SBP coverage their entire career, only to find out that if DIC also applied, the government would essentially claw back the SBP benefit. This caused enormous frustration and financial hardship for military families for decades. That offset has since been phased out through legislative changes, meaning eligible surviving spouses can now receive both DIC and full SBP payments without that reduction. If you were told years ago that this offset existed and made your planning more complicated, it's worth revisiting that information today, because the landscape has changed, and your spouse may now be entitled to more than you originally thought. Beyond DIC and SBP, there are other pieces of the puzzle that deserve attention. Surviving spouses may be eligible for a burial allowance to help cover funeral and burial costs, particularly if the veteran's death was service-connected. There's also the possibility of accrued benefits, which covers any compensation you were owed but hadn't yet received at the time of your death. Healthcare matters too. Surviving spouses of veterans who died from a service-connected condition may qualify for CHAMPVA, a health coverage program that can be a lifeline if she was relying on your VA-connected healthcare and suddenly finds herself without coverage. And there's home loan benefits as well. Certain surviving spouses retain eligibility for VA home loan benefits, which matters enormously if she ever needs to buy a home, refinance, or move after your passing. Now here's the piece that ties all of this together, and it's the reason I wanted to make this video instead of just listing benefits in a description box somewhere. None of these programs help your spouse automatically. Every single one of them requires an application, documentation, and often a waiting period. The veterans who protect their families best are the ones who build the paper trail now, while they're alive and capable of doing it, instead of leaving their spouse to reconstruct decades of service records and medical history while she's also planning a funeral, and figuring out how to pay the mortgage that month. That means keeping copies of your DD-214, your rating decisions, your medical evidence connecting your conditions to your service, and a written summary of what benefits you believe your spouse would be entitled to and where to find the paperwork. It means having an actual conversation with your spouse about SBP, about DIC eligibility, about where your important documents are kept, so that if the worst happens, she isn't starting from zero in the middle of the worst week of her life. I want to be honest with you about something else too. The VA system is not designed to proactively find your family and hand them money. It is a claims-based system, which means the burden falls on the survivor to know what to ask for and to prove it. This is why so many surviving spouses of veterans miss out on benefits they were fully entitled to, sometimes for years, simply because nobody told them these programs existed, or because the application process felt too overwhelming to tackle alone while grieving. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. The best time to build your spouse's survivor benefit file is today, not after a diagnosis, not after a health scare, and definitely not after you're gone. Sit down this week, gather your records, write down what you know about your rating history and your service-connected conditions, and have the conversation with your spouse about what she would need to do and who she would need to call if she ever had to apply for DIC or activate an SBP claim. If you're watching this and you're not sure whether you even qualify for these benefits, or you're not sure whether your rating history would support a DIC claim, that's exactly the kind of question worth bringing to an accredited veteran service officer. Someone trained specifically in VA claims who can review your specific situation and help you and your spouse put together the strongest possible case, both for benefits you're owed now and for what she would be entitled to later. This isn't something you have to figure out completely alone, and it isn't something that should sit on a to-do list indefinitely either. Before you go, I need to ask you for something. Because channels like this one only survive when people who find this information valuable help spread it. If this video gave you even one thing you didn't know before, one piece of the puzzle you hadn't considered, hit that subscribe button right now, because I put out content exactly like this every single week, breaking down the parts of the VA system that nobody explains clearly, the benefits that get missed, the deadlines that get overlooked, and the steps that actually protect your family instead of leaving them guessing. Subscribing costs you nothing, but it means the next veteran or the next military spouse who needs this exact information is more likely to find it, because the algorithm pays attention to channels people actually stick around for. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one, and if you know another veteran or another military family who needs to hear this, send them this video today, not next week. Today, because none of us know how much time we actually have, and the paperwork you handle now is the protection your spouse will need later. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If this video just showed you a gap in your family's protection that you didn't know existed, don't scroll away and forget about it. Hit subscribe right now. Every week I break down the VA benefits, survivor programs, and financial protections that nobody at the VA office sits you down and explains. The stuff that makes the real difference for your spouse and your kids when it matters most. This channel exists to make sure veteran families stop missing out on money and protection they've already earned. Subscribing takes 2 seconds. It's completely free, and it means you'll never miss the video that could end up saving your family thousands of dollars or months of stress. So smash that subscribe button, tap the bell for notifications, and share this with a veteran or a military spouse who needs to see it. Let's make sure no family gets left behind because nobody told them the truth in time. What if I told you that the check you count on every single month, the one that pays your mortgage, keeps the lights on, keeps your family afloat, vanishes the instant you die, and there's a good chance your spouse doesn't even know that? No warning, no grace period, just gone. And what replaces it depends entirely on whether you did one thing while you were still alive to set it up. Most veterans never do. Most spouses find out the hard way, in the middle of the worst week of their life, that the money they were counting on isn't coming. I'm going to show you exactly how to make sure that never happens to your family, so don't go anywhere.